Ukraine has reportedly developed its first ballistic missile. Just how did they get this advanced technology, and what does it mean for Russia? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So this is a really interesting story. Zelensky has announced that Ukraine had just tested its first ballistic missile. The first test of the domestic-made ballistic missile was on August 27th. He says it may be too early to talk about, but I want to share it with you. And he congratulated the Ukrainian defense industry on the project, but did not provide any details on the weaponry. But Defense Minister Rustem Umerov said, quote, "This once again proves that for victory, we need long-range capabilities and the lifting of restrictions on strikes, the enemy's military facility." Right? Ukraine is preparing its own response. He said, weapons of its own production. And this is really interesting. Of course, Kiev has gotten a bunch of what they call long-range missiles like ATACMS, Storm Shadows, or French Scalps, but the West adds caveats with them and has forbidden Ukraine from using many of their longest range, most effective weapons on targets unless they've been pre-approved by Western partners. And for Ukraine, that's been a pretty big constraint on their ability to really prosecute the war. Now, the thing to understand is likely why this is happening, right? One thing that's worth noting is that Ukraine, Zelensky also said in the same speech that Ukraine could produce 1.5 to 2 million drones this year, but doesn't have the funding. It's one of the reasons why crowdfunded drones have become so important, is that the drones can be built. It's just a matter of paying for them. Now, the question you're left with is kind of the why. And one of the things that's most interesting is that Ukrainian companies are really doubling down on their production of things like ground UAVs, anti-drone rifles. Of course, Ukraine is gradually turning into a sort of Silicon Valley for military industrial purposes. And again, like Silicon Valley, there's a confluence of things that I think are likely making this happen. The first of which is that in Ukraine, you have a lot of money, right? There's a lot of money coming in. And even if the money isn't going directly to Ukrainian military investments, the fact that the Ukrainian military budget, for example, they don't have to pay for the artillery rounds, they don't have to purchase the tanks, right? Those are being provided by Western partners. And that frees up funds to be allocated to these kind of R&D type of projects. You also have a industry rife for disruption. Literally, everyone in Ukraine would love to see a disrupting or game-changing piece of technology get rolled out onto the battlefield. So the need is so great. And you have a market that's willing to iterate, just like San Francisco in Uber in the early 2000s, where Uber was able to iterate on their ride-sharing app very quickly because the demand in San Francisco was so great, because public transit was so poor and demand to get around the city was so high. So you have this confluence of these factors of money, desire, and iteration could have coming together to actually, I think unironically, build a really interesting defense tech sector. But why? But something like a ballistic missile is very, very technical. We're going to talk about what exactly a ballistic missile can do, why I think it happened, and one other fun little story potentially if we have time to get to it. Okay, but first, of course, if you feel like you need to disrupt your own campaigns, maybe you don't need a game-changing weapon. Maybe you need game-changing energy. That's right, Strike Gum. You know it. It's the zero sugar energy drink alternative. If you're spending $5 a day on Red Bulls or Amp Energies to get the surge you need to tackle your day, Strike Gum's the superior alternative. We have 90 milligrams of caffeine in every single piece, right? That's a Red Bull's worth of caffeine in one piece of gum, plus 100 milligrams of alpha GPC, and there's no sugar, so there's no sugar crash. So you can go to strikegum.com. I encourage you to pick up the 5-pack, right? That's going to give you a pack for your car, a pack for your house, your office, your home office, and your gym bag. So you're going to be able to get the energy you need anytime, wherever you go. So be sure to check us out on strikegum.com. Link is in the description. Okay, so what exactly is a ballistic missile? Well, a ballistic missile is just a missile that spends only a limited amount of its time in flight being powered. Just like if you shot a gun into the air, the bullet would be sort of powered as it went through the barrel, but then it would fly like an artillery shell out and down again. But like an artillery shell, it could be very, very predictable. So someone asked, well, what if we strapped a rocket to an artillery shell, shot it into the sky, and let it fall a great, great distance away, but a predictable one? That is what a ballistic missile does. Now, short-range ballistic missiles, likely the kind that Ukraine has developed, have a range of only about 620 miles or less. But for context, if they have built a domestically produced short-range ballistic missile that can operate on the upper limit of ballistic missile tech, so 600 miles is about, what, 1,000 kilometers? Is that right? Is that what that said? Yeah, 1,000 kilometers. Okay, so 1,000 kilometers, lads, is going to take you all the way deep in. It can literally let Ukraine potentially, I think, hit Moscow. Here's the Ukrainian border. Oh, yeah. They are going to be really hitting Moscow, right? You can see they can literally hit nearly the Arctic Circle. If we're talking about 1,000 kilometers of distance, if this is truly a short-range ballistic missile. But you could see that basically a huge portion of Russia is going to be subject to the Ukrainian attacks if they indeed have short-range ballistic missiles in their arsenal. You can see essentially everything in Crimea will be a target, the entire Black Sea, and that's if this is a short-range ballistic missile, right? Of course, ICBMs capable of flying in orbit. These weapons are in a distinct category from cruise missiles, right? Now, cruise missiles, it's worth noting, are guided in powered flight and restricted to the atmosphere. They have much lower ranges. Here's the thing to take away, is that one, these things can carry, because they don't need to be powered the whole time, they can carry a pretty big punch, right? Because most of their trajectory is unpowered. It's just falling in a predictable way. So it's going to mean that a lot of Russian targets may suddenly become available. And this solves actually a problem kind of the West's own creation. And that is that when the West provides the ballistic missiles, right, and this is actually similar to a scheme that Russia and Iran ran with Shahed drones, right? And allegedly what North Korea and Russia are running into with Lancets, right? Where the West says, listen, if we give you this missile, you can only use it in these acceptable ways because it's our stuff. And we need to make sure that we are containing this conflict, even if Ukraine wants it to be used for more things. But if Ukraine makes it, it's not subject to those restrictions. Ukraine's an independent country. It can do whatever it wants. We didn't give it to them. So what happens if we give them, for example, all the key tech they need to make a ballistic missile? Let's say we give them some ballistic missiles, right? Right? Did we give them ballistic missiles? I want to see, actually. I don't think ATACMS are actually ballistic missiles. It says they're long-range missiles to Ukraine's. Are ATACMS ballistic missiles, right? That's the question. All right, there you go. ATACMS ballistic missiles. Yes, it is a tactical ballistic missile. So here's the thing. We gave the Ukrainians ATACMS. We're like, you can only use them in certain ways. But if Ukraine was to take the ATACMS and take it apart and build their own ATACMS clone, the U.S. would not be able to do anything to stop them from using it. We could do a lot of things to stop them from using it. But under current policy, they'd be able to blow up anything they damn well please if they built their own ATACMS, for example, right? So that appears to be what Ukraine has done. I also hypothesize, and I have no data to support this, but I hypothesize that like Russia, where part of their agreement was to advance the North Korean ballistic missile program, but they couldn't give the North Koreans ballistic missiles. What they gave them instead was data, technical specifications, and probably technicians to help them build their own. I suspect that we may have done the same thing for Ukraine, where we gave them the ATACMS, but maybe we also provided them some technical documentation, some flight trajectory data, some of the manufacturing of key components, key aspects of avionics. Gave them a little bit extra help, to sort of speed them along. Because for everybody who wants to see Ukraine succeed, the easiest way is to sit there and go, Ukraine's not using Western weapons. They're using their own weapons. Sure, they look, feel, and smell like an ATACMS, but they're just not. And it's not preposterous to say this because, again, the ATACMS was developed in 86. It's 40-year-old tech. So it's not like a huge leap for someone like Ukraine to build their own. Or again, it may be even a case of there's a new, it's a brand new, it's not re-engineered tech. It's a budget ballistic missile that Ukraine has built in-house. Again, maybe with some technical assistance, maybe not. But clearly Russia has already shown that they are willing to play this game, right? The game where they go, oh, we don't know how the Houthis got guided ballistic missiles. Oh, we don't know how Iran suddenly got these sophisticated drones that can evade radar. How could it have happened? They're not our drones. And we go, listen, we can see. We can see what they are. We can see your hand in this. And so it's absolutely predictable that we would sit there and say the same thing. We'd say, Ukraine's built their own ballistic missile. It's cheap. Man, good job, guys. We don't know how that happened. Again, this is just a theory. But I think it's what I would do. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Huge thank you to the Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. Martin Baum, Chris Rossi, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, Sergei Zinchenko, Chris Holmes, Chris Gorsuch. Couldn't do it without you guys, as well as our Lieutenant tier members. Appreciate you guys so much for your support. And be sure to hit subscribe. That makes a difference on this channel. It tells the YouTube algorithm that the content I make is good and legit. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.